So, there's one movie that I've been wanting to discuss for a while given how quirky and bold it was for its time. In general, I particularly like older movies as they don't really look the same as a lot of newer films, and this one caught my attention with its wild premise involving two straight guys trying to dodge the Vietnam draft by pretending to be a couple. To be frank, the Gay Deceivers does not have the best reviews, with a rating of 33% on Rotten Tomatoes at the time of this video. It has a higher rating of 5.9 on IMDb, and a 3.3 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. In short, I've seen a lot of conflicting discourse around this movie, but is it good or bad? Let's find out. Without further ado, on with the review.
Polos is life, 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 sleep all night and then Polos is life.
The film opens with a parody of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony playing over various images from the US military at the time. There are also excerpts from I've Been Working on the Railroad and The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy interpolated here, before we cut to a military drafting office. I've always found the music choices in this film to be quite interesting. We see a man fail to dodge the draft despite various ailments he suffers from, before our main characters are assessed.
It doesn't say, am I or aren't I? The way that it's worded is, have you ever had a...
I know what it says.
These two are Danny Devlin, played by Kevin Coughlin, and Elliot Crane, played by Larry Casey, who are trying to dodge the draft by posing as a gay couple. You might wonder why this is, but you have to remember that at the time this film was released, being gay was considered a psychiatric condition, and so gay people were deemed unfit to serve in the military. Some of the questions that they're asked by the psychologist do say a lot about how same-sex relationships were viewed at the time, but Elliot and Danny's answers are pretty funny, along with their fashion choices.
What do you think of her?
Oh, those are heavenly beads.
Long story short, the pair are rejected and classified as homosexuals, although the colonel does tell them that if the military finds any evidence to the contrary, they will be reclassified and drafted. Danny plans on going to Stanford to study law soon, and spends time around the pool with his fiancée, Karen. This also happens to be the same pool where Elliot works, and I'm sure this definitely won't complicate things. Elliot is actually known as something of a player and is very popular, and Danny warns him to drop the couple act around people they know, although he does use a ruder word. Later that night, Danny discovers that Elliot has invited a lady over to entertain him, let's say. There's an awkwardly drawn-out makeout session before Danny realizes that the colonel is waiting downstairs to catch them in the act, I guess? Danny tells Elliot that they need to move away to get the colonel off their backs, but Elliot protests, saying that he doesn't have the money. Danny promises to cover the expenses and says a line that made me laugh out loud, simply because of how direct it is.
Look, how can I walk out on her now? She's gonna buy me a car.
Oh, wonderful. Why don't you go get your tail shut off in Vietnam and she can buy you a wheelchair?
They resolve to move into an estate popular with the local gay community, their cottage boasting one elaborate red and plush bedroom. The room is nice and very 60s, they're just not actually a couple. Danny's family have mixed opinions about him moving away, and his sister, Leslie, doesn't approve of Elliot. Danny and Elliot are then visited by their landlord, the flamboyantly femme Malcolm, who is probably the best and is certainly the most memorable character in the film. He's played by Michael Greer, who is gay in real life. Elliot tells Malcolm that he and Danny are newlyweds, although he means this in every sense except the legal one. Malcolm leaves to feed his peonies, and boasts of their beauty, which is something that will come up later. Danny is bothered by the fact that Elliot seems to be taking their whole ruse far less seriously than he is, and Elliot is very bothered by the fact that Danny has forbidden him from pursuing casual relationships with women for the time being, while still seeing Karen. The next morning, Malcolm visits again and offers to cook breakfast for Danny and Elliot, all while playing classical music and dancing. After Elliot greatly offends Malcolm by putting sauce on his omelette and eating it with his hands, he sees Danny's parents walking towards the cottage.
Not this.
Elliot nervously invites them in, and while Mrs. Devlin approves of the decor, Mr. Devlin seems a bit confused. I find Danny's excuse rather confusing myself.
Well, you see, 2 women lived here before we did, and we haven't had a chance to change it yet.
What? So it would have been socially acceptable for 2 women to share a bed in a romance-themed room, but not 2 men? Malcolm fawns over Mrs. Devlin's good taste in outfits, and Danny rushes them out before having dinner with Karen that evening. I do feel a little sorry for her in this scene, as Danny dances around her visiting his new place, and it's very obvious that he's making excuses. Malcolm and his partner Craig give Danny and Elliot a Michelangelo-shaped lamp, and Craig talks to Elliot about the struggles in their relationship. Craig mentions having had many casual relationships before meeting Malcolm, something he found draining and eventually tired of, which Elliot seems to relate to. Just then, Leslie and one of Elliot's girlfriends, Bunny, arrive and intend to snoop around. They unintentionally insult Malcolm by mocking the decor, and leave in a huff upon realizing this. Elliot and Danny go into the other room to argue, and Malcolm and Craig leave. Danny heads to their house to apologize for the scene that was made, although they're very understanding about it. Meanwhile, Mrs. Conway, a friend of Mrs. Devlin's who'd been helping Elliot out with his rent, pays Elliot a visit, if you know what I mean. Danny awkwardly walks in on this, and Mrs. Conway leaves in a hurry. She stumbles outside clumsily and ends up stepping into Malcolm's flowers, leading to this iconic exchange.
You dirty bitch! Look what you've done to my peonies!
And besides, you silly queen, they're not even peonies! They're marigolds!
Good God, I think she's right. They are marigolds.
I may not know my flowers, but I know a bitch when I see one!
Danny tells Elliot off for risking being seen engaging in romantic behavior with women, and Elliot responds by saying that Danny is taking risks with Karen, and uses some 60s slang that honestly needs to make a comeback.
Can't we be AC/DC?
Oh, you're hopeless.
Leslie accuses Elliot of being gay to her father, who later overhears him doing an impression of Malcolm in the pool showers. Taking all of this seriously, Mr. Devlin orders that Elliot be fired, and rumors about this whole ordeal begin to spread on the basis that he's a bad influence on the kids. This is tragically ironic given that Elliot seems to have a preference for older women.
Considering what you've been doing to their mothers, you might have a point there.
Karen worries that Danny is being unfaithful and demands to see where he and Elliot are living. At the same time, Elliot heads to a gay bar and flirts with a man who buys him a drink. After her worries are quelled, Karen insists she and Danny go into the gay bar, where they spot Elliot. Now drunk, Elliot punches the guy before blurting out the plan to Karen. Thinking Danny and Elliot are really a couple, Karen flees. We also see the Colonel at the bar. The next day, Malcolm invites Elliot to his and Craig's annual costume ball, while Karen goes sailing. Leslie denies that Danny is gay, and to prove it, she attempts to seduce Elliot. This doesn't pan out when Elliot gets cold feet given that she's Danny's sister, although Leslie interprets this as confirmation that he's gay. Elliot attends Malcolm's party dressed as a scantily clad Dracula, but Danny refuses to go. Elliot spots a drag queen across the room and assumes she's a woman, although Malcolm interprets them sneaking off to the bedroom as him cheating on Danny. Elliot realizes his mistake, and the Colonel walks in on this, meaning the jig is up. Regardless, Karen simply doesn't believe Danny when he tells her he's straight, and she says she's leaving for Miami the following day. When Craig and Malcolm attempt to comfort Danny, he still refuses to attend the party, where a fight breaks out. Mr. Devlin also refuses to believe Danny's story about him and Elliot simply trying to dodge the draft, and even the Colonel refuses to reclassify them. Danny and Elliot agree to go their separate ways, and it's revealed that the Colonel and his sergeant are actually a couple trying to keep straight people out of the military.
What a twist!
So, what did I think of the Gay Deceivers overall? I think it's an interesting film that serves as a time capsule for the topics it attempts to discuss. I did try to touch on this during my commentary, but I think an important thing to consider while discussing this film is when it came out. Homosexuality was still very much considered a criminal offence at the time, which was also during the middle of the Vietnam War. With that being said, I also find the premise that the two protagonists, Elliot and Danny, are being investigated by the military for not being gay an obvious satirical reversal of the real-life investigations into gay people serving in the military at the time. Not only is this funny, but it also highlights how absurd such investigations were. Elliot's behaviour really confused me the first time I watched the film, as I wasn't sure whether he was questioning his preferences or simply acting out of spite. Upon my rewatch, I think that while certain actions he takes out of spite, he doesn't take Danny's farce seriously throughout, and just becomes more empathetic towards his gay neighbours via the judgment he faces himself. I will say that the moments of homophobia did make me feel uncomfortable as a modern viewer, on top of the irony that Elliot and Danny really aren't gay anyway. I'd say that the stigma that the characters face is presented as unfair, but typical or expected in the culture at the time, with Mr. Devlin even telling Danny that he should have expected this to come with his scheme.
Did you ever ask any of your fairy friends what it's like to have a stigma like that attached to them? Did you? Huh?
The scene where Karen insists that she and Danny go into the gay bar really irritated me too, as I just don't understand why she would want to enter such an establishment so badly if gay people bother her that much.
There's one behind you and he's wearing an earring.
It's just so weird to talk about another person like that, although I guess that's the point that the film was making. However, I do love the slang used in the film, as while it does come across as rather silly now, it really grounds the film in the 60s, and adds a layer of authenticity to it. I also sometimes forget that the slang term cool has changed slightly since it initially became popular. The music featured in The Gay Deceivers is one of the first things I think of when I hear the title, as I was surprised at the amount of classical music used in it during my initial watch. I think it really adds to the comedic moments in the film, particularly the use of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and Habanera from Carmen. I couldn't review this film without talking about the controversy surrounding it though. The Gay Deceivers was banned in Australia from its release until 1971, likely due to it depicting homosexuality at all. The film was protested at the time in America and has been regarded as offensive by some due to its stereotypical portrayal of gay men. One famous quote from a protester that I've seen in several articles states that the film flaunts every sickening prejudice and misconception about gay men, including the lack of manliness and patriotism. I have to say that the gay men in the film are definitely stereotyped, lisp and all, but there are sequences portraying them with some humanity. I feel like I'm not really in a position to say whether the film is offensive or not, as I'm not a gay man, but I will say it seems to be trying to say something about how gay people were treated at the time. It's just quite ambiguous with its message in parts and is very much a product of its time. In the end, The Gay Deceivers is an interesting piece of cinematic history that may be a bit of an uncomfortable watch at times. It does come with a quirky mix of comedy, controversy, and cultural context that would make it worth watching for anyone interested in this area of 20th century cinema. Well, that's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.
The blue and green ones are my favorite kind, but I'll eat the colored ones from time to time. Cause polos is life, 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 polos is life. Sleep all night and then polos is life.